The young maid was hired to work at the famous actress's mansion, but she was shocked to see a photo of her father while cleaning the bedroom. The morning was cold when Sarah received the call that would change her life. On the other end of the line, a firm, professional voice confirmed that she had been selected to work at Victoria Carter's mansion. Her hands trembled with excitement and fear as she tried to take in the news. She could hardly believe that, among so many applicants, the famous actress had chosen her. A simple young woman who grew up hearing stories of success and glory. This opportunity was more than just a job. It was a dream coming to life, a chance to change her life and provide some comfort to her mother, who had carried the weight of the household alone for years. When she told her mother, Sarah's smile radiated a mix of hope and apprehension. "Mom, can you believe it? Victoria Carter. The one from the movies we love." She could hardly contain her excitement. Her mother, eyes filled with pride, caressed her face and whispered, "My daughter, you deserve all this and more. Work with dedication, and who knows, maybe something even more beautiful awaits you." Her words echoed in Sarah's heart, boosting her determination to give her all in this new chapter of her life. The night before her first day, Sarah could barely sleep. Her mind was racing with questions. Would she live up to expectations? Would Victoria, such a grand woman, treat a young girl like her with respect? She had seen so many movies starring Victoria that, in her mind, the actress seemed almost like an unreachable goddess, shining on a pedestal of success and perfection. But fear quickly gave way to excitement and the eagerness to give her best, no matter the challenge. Dressed in her spotless uniform and with her hair pulled back simply, Sarah took the bus that would take her to Victoria's mansion. The journey, passing through luxurious neighborhoods she only knew from television, made her heart beat even faster. Each house she saw seemed grander than the last, but none could match her expectations for her new workplace. It felt like she was entering a fairy tale world, where the hardships of the past could finally transform into hope. When she got off the bus and faced the tall, elegant gates of the mansion, a chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, the opportunity felt immense, and she felt so small before the grandeur of the place. A doorman greeted her with a subtle nod and indicated where she should enter, while Sarah tried to maintain a professional posture. Her mind, however, wandered between reality and daydreams. "It's real. I'm really here," she whispered to herself in a mix of awe and gratitude. Before entering, Sarah took in the mansion's facade, with its high columns and expansive windows that seemed to hide secrets. Every architectural detail was designed to impress, as if the house itself reflected the owner's magnitude. Taking a deep breath, Sarah prepared to step into a completely new world, knowing she would need to adapt, learn, and above all, prove herself. Upon entering, she was greeted by a stern-looking housekeeper dressed impeccably. "You're Sarah, correct?" asked the woman in a tone that mixed authority with formality. Sarah nodded, slightly intimidated but determined to do whatever it took to earn respect. The housekeeper looked her up and down and offered a faint smile, as if she had assessed something and silently approved. "Come, we'll start your training. And remember, here, discretion is essential." With her heart racing, Sarah followed the housekeeper, absorbing every word, every instruction. It was as if she was walking on eggshells, afraid of making a mistake, yet eager to prove her worth. As she walked through the hall, she could feel the mansion's grandeur resonating in every detail around her. The decor, the paintings, the sculptures, everything seemed enveloped in a mystery that left her mesmerized. With each step, Sarah realized that the world she was entering wasn't just one of luxury and glamour but of demands, expectations, and many eyes watching every move. Sarah took her first steps into Victoria Carter's mansion with her heart pounding, as if she were about to enter a world that until then seemed to belong only to magazines and movie screens. Ahead of her, an immense hall stretched, filled with crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling and golden frames adorning every corner. The paintings on the walls depicted classic scenes, painted with a mastery that seemed to spill out of the frames. She felt the weight of the environment, almost as if she were being watched by the unseeing eyes of the figures in the paintings, figures that seemed to evaluate her presence. Every detail in the mansion exuded a discreet yet imposing elegance. The furniture, arranged with almost mathematical precision, was made of fine wood, crafted in delicate details that reflected light and shadow in a mesmerizing way. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything there was almost sacred, a reflection of Victoria's public image, untouchable, perfect, without flaws. As she lightly ran her hand over a marble table, she thought of the responsibility that lay upon her to keep that place impeccable. As she ventured deeper into the house, Sarah noticed the collection of sculptures displayed along the main corridor. Marble statues in classical poses, sculpted with impressive delicacy. Each piece seemed to hold a story, a fragment of a life, and the heavy silence of the place made every step echo, reminding her that this world was not really hers. Still, even though she was scared, she felt the commitment to prove that she deserved to be there. The housekeeper, walking ahead of Sarah, gave a brief explanation of the mansion's cleaning system, speaking in a formal but firm tone. "Miss Carter is very detail-oriented, Sarah. It's not enough to clean, you must observe and understand the details." Sarah nodded in silence, memorizing every instruction with the seriousness of a dedicated student. Inside, she promised herself that she wouldn't overlook any detail. Everything had to be up to the standards of that house and its owner. As she explored other rooms, the luxury unfolded in ways that left her breathless. One of the rooms looked like an old library with high shelves reaching from floor to ceiling, filled with hardcover books, each with titles engraved in golden letters. Sarah felt a twinge of fascination and curiosity as she imagined what secrets might be hidden in the pages of those works. And for a moment she pictured Victoria herself there, sitting in a dark green velvet armchair, leafing through an old novel. But the awe didn't distract her from her purpose. Despite knowing the work was hard, Sarah kept her eyes sharp. With a cloth in hand, she carefully cleaned the surfaces, taking care not to change the original placement of objects, which seemed meticulously positioned to suit a specific taste. Sarah knew that every piece, every relic had a story, a reason for being there, and she felt the weight of that responsibility. In one of the rooms, a collection of crystals sparkled under the natural light streaming through the large windows. Sarah found herself watching the reflections dance around the room, creating small rainbows of color on the white marble floor. It was then that she realized clearly the difference between that world and hers, a world where beauty was not just a whim but a sacred rule. As strange as it felt, she also wanted in some way to belong to it. As she continued cleaning, she crossed paths with other employees in the mansion who gave her discreet looks and polite nods. There was not a single warm word of welcome, but she felt a silent acceptance, as if her work was already a necessary part of that perfect mechanism. Everyone there seemed to know their role, and Sarah began to understand that she was now part of that carefully orchestrated machinery. Finally, after finishing her first morning of work, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. There was much more to explore, but she already understood that this was a complex world, where luxury and beauty coexisted with rigidity and perfectionism. The challenge she faced went far beyond cleaning every corner. She felt she needed to rise to the level of that universe, as if each polishing stroke was also polishing herself. The morning began like any other, but for Sarah, this day promised a touch of unexpected curiosity. The housekeeper approached her with the same stern expression as always, and in a tone suggesting more secrecy than command, she informed her that she would need to clean Mrs. Carter's personal bedroom. Sarah, who until then had only seen the common spaces, felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. She knew she was about to enter an intimate space, where Victoria Carter probably kept hidden parts of her private life that never appeared in magazines. When she opened the door, Sarah was greeted by a room that seemed from another era. Unlike the rest of the mansion, the bedroom was delicately decorated with personal, soft, and nostalgic touches. The walls, painted in shades of lavender and cream, contrasted with the cold luxury of the house. There, everything seemed smaller, cozier, almost as if it were a capsule of memories, where Victoria was just a woman and not the unreachable actress everyone knew. The sensation of entering a private sanctuary filled Sarah with caution. Sarah began cleaning carefully, avoiding moving any object more than necessary. On the dresser, several picture frames were lined up, but all facing inward, as if they were small treasures Victoria kept just for herself. One of them caught her attention, a black and white image of a young Victoria, her hair styled in a vintage updo, smiling dazzlingly but reservedly, almost as if that joy were locked in a past time. She picked up a duster and as she approached the shelf beside the bed, she saw there rested old diaries with worn covers. The diaries bore Victoria Carter's name in delicate, almost childlike letters, dating back years before her fame. Sarah knew she shouldn't dare to touch them, but the mere fact that they were there sparked an inevitable curiosity. What would such a renowned star have written so intimately and privately on pages that no one would ever read? Near the diaries, a small music box seemed to hold even more memories. Sarah hesitated, but curiosity was stronger, and when she turned the small handle, a soft melody began to fill the room. The music was melancholic, laden with a sentimentality that Sarah hadn't expected to hear in such a place. That melody seemed to tell a story of longing and loss, and she wondered what that fragile and unique object represented for Victoria. On the bed lay a light blue knitted blanket that contrasted with the luxurious bedding of the rest of the mansion. It was subtle and simple, with small uneven stitches, as if it had been handmade by someone special. Sarah couldn't help but think that maybe Victoria was more than just a distant star. Perhaps she held a deep sadness, a longing that in some way humanized all the grandeur she showed the world. Returning to the dresser, Sarah found a small wooden box with aged edges. As she opened it to clean, she saw a collection of carefully folded notes. Each one, written in soft handwriting, contained phrases like "yours forever" and "with love, Jay." They revealed secrets of a past passion. Sarah held her breath, imagining the intensity of that relationship and why Victoria still kept those notes. It was clear there was a hidden love there, a memory Victoria kept to herself. As she finished cleaning the bedroom, Sarah felt that each object told a story, a piece of a past that didn't match the actress's public image. This space seemed to hold the most human parts of Victoria, the ones the world didn't know, and that she herself made a point of protecting. It was like a time capsule, where Victoria kept everything she had loved and perhaps lost. Sarah felt a mix of respect and empathy for this woman who hid so much behind her flawless appearance. Near the end of her cleaning, Sarah turned to the vanity mirror, where she noticed a small detail, a photo hidden under a delicate handkerchief. In the picture, Victoria looked happy, surrounded by friends, but there was something in her expression that intrigued Sarah. Perhaps it was the shine in her eyes or the restrained way she smiled. Something in that photo seemed to contradict the image of perfection everyone knew. Sarah continued her routine in Victoria Carter's intimate room, absorbing the enveloping aura of such a distinct space. While organizing the dresser, she noticed one of the drawers slightly open, revealing a faint metallic gleam that piqued her curiosity. Carefully moving aside a set of old handkerchiefs that covered the object, her heart raced when she realized there was a picture frame. She picked it up delicately, but upon seeing the face in the photo, she felt an overwhelming wave of shock and disbelief. It was her father. Her father, John, young and smiling beside Victoria, both with a radiant sparkle in their eyes. The image seemed to capture a simple, happy moment frozen in time. John and Victoria were arm in arm like old friends or maybe something more. Sarah was paralyzed, unable to process what this could mean. Her hands trembled and she had to hold herself back from dropping the frame. Questions began to race through her mind, piling up and leaving her utterly disoriented. Why would Victoria have a picture of her father? And why had no one ever told her about this strange and unexpected link? She continued to stare at the photo, trying to absorb every detail. There was an evident affection between them, something intimate and shared. John smiled with an expression Sarah had never seen in her memories of him, almost as if he were another person, young, carefree. The image of her mother crossed her mind, and Sarah felt a pang of anguish, for she had no idea that this past could exist. What did her mother know? Did she know about this side of John's life? The questions now seemed uncontrollable. Feeling a mix of fear and urgency, Sarah looked around, as if afraid someone might witness this intimate moment of revelation. The room was completely silent, and everything seemed to conspire to make this discovery even more surreal. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her scattered thoughts, but the image of the two of them smiling remained etched in her mind. Sarah felt an inexplicable need to confront Victoria, to demand answers, even though she knew the actress might not be willing to reveal them. What had started as a routine cleaning now entangled her in a web of unexpected secrets. Sarah realized she was holding not just a photograph but a hidden piece of her own story, something that had been stolen from her by silence and distance until that moment. This image could change everything she knew about her family, about the man she called her father, and maybe even about herself. Sarah stood still, trying to comprehend the weight of what this discovery represented. Her mind drifted back to the fragmented stories her mother used to tell about John, always mentioning how he was a reserved person who kept certain parts of his life in silence. However, nothing had ever suggested a connection with someone like Victoria Carter. The shock of the revelation made Sarah's chest ache, while at the same time filling her with a strange hope that perhaps this discovery could provide answers to the mysteries that had always surrounded her childhood. With the photo still in her hands, she began to feel a lightness she couldn't explain, a curiosity mixed with a deep fear of what else might come to light. Could it be that her mother knew nothing of this part of John's life? Or did she choose to keep it all a secret? Sarah wondered if she was truly ready to uncover the answers suggested by that photo, but something stronger urged her to want to know. Suddenly, she found herself short of breath and closed her eyes, trying to regain composure. She needed to think clearly before acting, before making any decisions that might put her in a position with no return. Emotions consumed her, and the intimate atmosphere of the room, filled with Victoria's secrets, now seemed to harbor her own internal dilemmas as well, as if the place were a sanctuary of hidden truths. When she finally managed to take a deep breath, Sarah returned the photo frame to the drawer, trying to regain her composure. She needed to act as if nothing had happened, at least for now, but the feeling that something immense had been uncovered would not leave her in peace anytime soon. That night, Sarah lay in bed with her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her heart still racing as if the weight of that discovery were pressing down on her. The image of her father, John, smiling beside Victoria Carter, was imprinted in her mind. Every detail of that photograph was etched in her memory, and the doubt, almost unbearable, consumed her. She tossed and turned, trying to understand how that piece of her father's life had been hidden from her for so long. Memories of her mother surfaced, but now with a new context. Sarah recalled the stories she had heard over the years, fragments about John that never fully connected. Her mother always spoke of him with a tenderness mixed with melancholy, always emphasizing his reserved and mysterious nature. Never, in all the time she talked about John, did she mention someone as important as Victoria Carter. But could it be possible that she truly knew nothing of this connection? In the silence of the night, the weight of the questions intensified. Every detail of her life now seemed like a clue, every phrase her mother had uttered, a hidden secret. And was her father more than just the man she had known? Could he have had a secret relationship with the famous actress? Sarah didn't know what was more painful, the doubt about a possibly hidden past or the fear that her own mother had known and chosen to keep it secret. The hours dragged on, and the darkness of her room seemed to mirror the tangled emotions consuming her. Sarah longed to understand why that photo seemed so vivid, so full of hidden meanings. She tried to recall every word her mother had spoken about her father, every silence, every look, searching for a clue that might now make sense. But the more she remembered, the more she was certain there was something significant that had been left out. She remembered a moment long ago when she had asked about John's past and saw her mother hesitate, her gaze lost in some distant point. "Some things should stay in the past, Sarah," her mother had said in an almost final tone. Back then, Sarah had believed it to be something mundane, a common pain from the past. But now, those words returned with a different weight, echoing like a carefully guarded secret. Each beat of her heart seemed to bring a new wave of uncertainties, and Sarah found herself wishing for morning to come quickly. She didn't know if she would have the courage to ask Victoria about the photo, but the idea of confronting her grew stronger in her mind. Maybe the actress could clarify everything. Maybe she could reveal a side of John that Sarah had never known. But what if Victoria chose to hide the truth as well? And what if the photo was only the beginning of something much larger? She got up, walking to the window to look at the empty street outside, lit only by the dim glow of streetlights. The city slept while her inner world seemed to be in complete turmoil. The night air gave her a momentary sense of peace, but the weight of the discovery quickly returned, crushing any hope for tranquility. There was something in that photo that seemed to beg to be unraveled, and she knew she wouldn't find rest until she had answers. When she returned to bed, sleep still felt distant. Sarah imagined what the encounter between her father and Victoria might have been like at that time, the two of them young, smiling, carefree, just as in the photo. She wondered what had brought them together, what might have caused that friendship, or romance, to end. Had her father really been someone different from the man she had always known? The doubt turned into an almost grieving process for the man she thought she fully understood. Finally, just before dawn, Sarah accepted that she would not find peace until she solved this mystery. Her feelings were tangled, but she knew she needed to dig deeper, even if it meant facing a painful truth. The next day, Sarah could barely contain her anxiety as she cleaned the mansion's silent corridors. The image of her father and Victoria together, smiling as if sharing an eternal secret, pulsed in her mind. Each passing minute only intensified her desire to understand the truth, and no matter how much fear tried to hold her back, she knew she had to confront the actress. Taking a deep breath, she decided that there would be no more hesitation. She needed to have that conversation. Finally, Sarah found Victoria in a private room, absent-mindedly flipping through a thick book. The actress seemed oblivious to everything, with the serious, impassive expression she always maintained, but Sarah noticed a lightness in her posture, as if she were immersed in memories. Approaching cautiously, Sarah cleared her throat, catching Victoria's attentive gaze. The young woman's heart beat so fast that it almost robbed her of speech, but the words came with an uncontrollable urgency. "Mrs. Carter, I need to know about a photo I found." Victoria raised her eyebrows, surprised by the young maid's audacity. She closed the book slowly, placing it on her lap, and looked at Sarah with an intrigued expression. "Photo? What photo, Sarah?" she asked as if the matter held no importance, but Sarah detected a slight tension in her tone. The actress, who usually kept a firm and controlled demeanor, seemed uncomfortable, almost anxious about what the young woman might reveal. Encouraged by Victoria's reaction, Sarah swallowed hard and continued. "A photo of my father John, with you. The two of you very young." The mention of John's name made Victoria freeze, and Sarah saw a shadow pass over the actress's eyes, as if something profoundly painful had been revived. For a moment Victoria looked away, and the silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating, a moment that seemed to contain years of untold stories. When she finally looked back at Sarah, Victoria's eyes were different. There was a latent sadness mixed with a hint of tenderness. "John?" she whispered almost to herself, as if it were a name she had kept only in her memory. "It's been so long since I heard anyone say his name." She tried to regain her composure, but the sincere desperation in Sarah's gaze made her falter. And at that moment, the mask of the perfect, untouchable celebrity began to crack. I need to understand," Sarah insisted, feeling her emotions overflowing. "Why was my father in that photo with you? What happened between you?" Victoria hesitated, observing the young woman before her with a penetrating gaze, as if calculating every possible consequence of the words she was about to say. But something in Sarah's pain, perhaps the echo of her own, convinced her to open a door she had sworn to keep shut. With a deep sigh, Victoria let her shoulders relax, her rigid expression melting into vulnerability. "Sarah, some stories are harder to remember than anyone could imagine." Her voice was low, and for the first time, she seemed to be speaking not as the great actress but as a woman marked by memories. Slowly, she placed her hand over Sarah's, as if to share the weight of what she was about to reveal. Victoria looked away toward the window, and Sarah saw her eyes welling up, though she held back the tears firmly. "There was a time many years ago, when John and I were inseparable." The admission seemed to cut through the air between them, carrying the sorrow of a story that, until now, Victoria had kept locked away somewhere deep in her heart. The actress slouched slightly, as if reliving a love that had never been fully lived. Trying to find strength in her memories, Victoria continued. "He was the love of my life, Sarah, but also my greatest loss." The revelation struck Sarah with an indescribable force, and she felt an overwhelming empathy for the woman in front of her, realizing that, despite all the fame and wealth, Victoria also carried wounds. And in the reflection of the actress's pain, Sarah began to understand that the man she had always idealized may have lived a much more complex life than she had imagined. They both remained silent for a moment, united by a story that was just beginning to be uncovered, while the previous night now seemed distant. 9. Victoria took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to dive into the depths of a past that, until that moment, she had kept locked away. "John was the love of my life," she began, her voice broken with emotion. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs at those words. It was as if her worldview, built around her father's image, was about to completely change. "He came into my life when I was still searching for my way. I was a nobody," Victoria continued, a melancholic glow in her eyes. "But he saw something in me, something that made me feel whole." With a hesitant voice, Victoria seemed to reconnect with memories that, though distant, were too alive to forget. "John had a serene strength, a calm that comforted everyone around him," she confessed with a sad smile. "That time, it was magical, as if the world was only ours." The actress looked away, and Sarah realized that Victoria wasn't just talking about a simple romance. It was a deep love, the kind that changes a person's essence when experienced. "But then, he disappeared," Victoria revealed, closing her eyes as if reliving the emptiness of that moment. "One night, he simply vanished without a trace." Sarah noticed the tremor in the actress's voice, an old wound that still bled, a scar that had never healed. "I spent months waiting for a letter, a phone call, any sign that would explain why he left. But all I was left with was silence." Victoria seemed about to be lost in her own sorrow, and Sarah felt a deep compassion, an invisible bond uniting their losses. Victoria wiped away a stubborn tear sliding down her face and continued. "At first I thought he'd come back, that maybe there was an explanation." She paused, her tone collapsing into resignation. "But time passed, and with it came the realization that I would never see him again." Every word she spoke was weighted, as if admitting abandonment was as painful as experiencing it. For Victoria, John was not just a memory, he was a part of her, an emptiness that would never be filled. Sarah's heart pounded wildly as she heard every detail. She wondered how her father could have kept such a secret all his life and why he had never told anyone. The truth, revealed so rawly, brought a sense of dismay to Sarah as she tried to understand how the man she had known could have been so different from what she imagined. "He was my father," she murmured, more to herself than to Victoria, trying to fit the scattered pieces of that story. Victoria, noticing Sarah's confusion, squeezed her hand gently. "I understand what you're going through, Sarah. When he disappeared, a part of me shattered forever. I tried to move on, to rebuild my life, but John was unique." Victoria's words carried the weight of longing and regret, a shared and silent pain that both could feel. "I never understood why he vanished, and to this day it haunts me. I wonder every day what drove him away from me." Victoria then explained that she had sought answers for a long time, but doors kept closing and clues disappeared. "Some people said he'd left the country. Others said he was involved in something dangerous," she confided. "But I never believed any of those stories. I knew John like no one else, and I knew he would never do something like that without a good reason." The mix of despair and conviction in Victoria's eyes showed that even after all those years, the love she felt for John was unchanging. Sarah couldn't help but shed a tear as she realized the depth of that loss. Victoria's love for John was a mystery that now enveloped her as well. The actress's words revealed a side of her father that Sarah had never known. A man who, for some reason, needed to disappear, breaking away from a true love. And in that moment she knew her next step would be to discover the truth, whatever it might be. A heavy silence hung between Sarah and Victoria, each absorbing the depth of what they had shared. Both had loved John in different ways, and while the experiences were unique, the pain was similar. Sarah loved him as a daughter, a deep connection always tinged with mystery. Victoria, on the other hand, had loved him with the intensity of an unforgettable passion, a love that left scars and unanswered questions. Now, in an unexpected way, that loss bound them in a way that was impossible to ignore. Victoria looked at Sarah with tired eyes, yet with a glimmer of understanding that only years of shared pain could create. "I always wondered if he was okay, wherever he was," she confessed with a painful sigh. "You lived beside him, had the privilege that I never had again," she continued, as if admitting this brought some needed relief. Sarah sensed that in her loss, Victoria also felt excluded, left without the answers her heart so deeply craved. Sarah nodded, trying to process the empathy she was beginning to feel for this woman so different from herself, who now felt almost like a friend, an ally in a mutual secret. "I always thought I knew him well," Sarah whispered. "But hearing about you, I feel like a part of me never truly understood him." It was as if, in discovering her father's secret, she had also lost a piece of who she always believed she was. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Sarah and Victoria stood on opposite sides of the same story, yet shared the same doubts, the same scars. "Have you ever thought that maybe, together, we could find the truth?" Victoria asked, with a timid determination that hinted at hope. For the first time, the idea of unearthing the past sounded less daunting and more like a necessary closure, a chance to free themselves from the weight they both carried. Sarah felt a wave of relief at hearing that proposal. After all, part of her anguish stemmed from the loneliness of bearing those questions. "You're right. I think we need to find the answers he left us." She spoke with a firmness that surprised even herself, feeling that perhaps this was the final step in truly knowing her father and herself. Something in the exchange of looks with Victoria seemed to say that, together, they could face anything. They decided, then, to embark on a search. They didn't know what they might find, and perhaps they weren't ready for every answer, but the uncertainty now seemed far less threatening. The past now called them, and both were willing to follow it as far as necessary. This new alliance, forged from losses and secrets, brought an unexpected lightness to Sarah, a strength she never imagined having. As they left the room, they felt closer than mere employee and employer. The barriers of formality dissolved with each shared confidence, with each vulnerability admitted. They walked side by side, carrying memories and fragments of John that, little by little, formed a clearer picture. Victoria sighed and, almost speaking to herself, murmured, "If I had known all this earlier, maybe none of this would have been so painful." From that moment on, they knew they were no longer alone. The loneliness they had felt over the years now dissipated, and the pain that united them transformed into courage. "I can't leave this emptiness inside me," said Sarah, holding Victoria's gaze firmly, who nodded in understanding. The pact was sealed. They would dive back into the past, a past that now belonged to them both. And so, with the wounds of love and abandonment still raw, Sarah and Victoria shared a purpose greater than either of them could bear alone. the decision to investigate John's past took on an almost solemn form. In the days that followed, Sarah and Victoria began to delve into the shadows of a past that had always lingered at the edges of their lives. With papers spread across a desk in the private study of the mansion, they examined every document, letter, and photograph that could offer a clue. In silence, Sarah absorbed each fragment, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the one who now began to reveal himself before her eyes. One of the first clues came from an old address book of Victoria's, where John's name was registered among the elegant letters of other contacts. Beside his name was a simple note, "Inspiration and Safe Harbor." The brief phrase touched Sarah deeply. Victoria, seated next to her, sighed as she remembered how John had motivated her in the early steps of her career, when the world still did not know her name. The love story they shared gained more real contours, and with it, the sense of loss intensified for both of them. Their journey led them to seek out John's old friends and acquaintances, people he had left behind when he disappeared. In an old cafe, they met a gray-haired man who recognized John's name immediately. "Ah, John, he was a special man," he said, his eyes filling with memories. "But he had a side he hid, you know? Something that haunted him." Hearing this, Sarah and Victoria exchanged glances, feeling that they had stumbled upon a secret they were not yet prepared to face, but one that now seemed inevitable. With each conversation, John's past became more complex. His old friends spoke of him with admiration but always mentioned a constant worry that seemed to follow John's every step, an invisible burden that no one fully understood. "He was reserved, even among friends," recalled one acquaintance. "As if he always had one eye on something no one else could see." Sarah shivered at the thought that her father may have hidden much more than she had ever imagined. Days later, they found an old letter among Victoria's belongings, a note John had written just before he disappeared. "If I don't come back, remember, it was always for you," read the scribbled words, accompanied by enigmatic phrases that only seemed to deepen the mystery. Victoria held the letter with trembling hands, rereading those words as if searching for answers between the lines. "What was he protecting?" she whispered, more to herself than to Sarah, who by now was as deeply invested as she was. Dealing with the lack of straightforward answers wasn't easy. Each clue seemed to lead to a dead end, leaving Sarah and Victoria exhausted, yet all the more determined. "He was trapped in something he couldn't share," concluded Victoria, trying for the 1,000th time to understand the enigma that John had become. The mystery was now no longer just a matter of curiosity but an almost sacred mission. There was something behind each word, each gesture, something he had hidden out of love. But why? Their search led them to reach out to people in other states, distant relatives, and figures who only remembered John as a name in their memories. A distant cousin recalled a sudden, brief visit, where John had seemed suspicious and rushed. He barely spoke about what he was doing. He only mentioned that it was dangerous and that it was best not to know, the woman recounted. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, imagining that this secret might have been the cause of his disappearance. With every meeting, the mystery deepened. After weeks of investigation, Victoria and Sarah decided to revisit a specific place from their memories, a secluded cabin where John and Victoria had spent time together. The place had been abandoned for years, but for them, it still pulsed with memories of a love lost to time. Between the floorboards, they found a small metal box rusted with age. Inside was a photo of John with an enigmatic message: "Only the truth will bring us peace." The weight of that message felt like a plea, a distant echo of John's desire for closure that he himself had not been able to achieve. Victoria held the photo carefully, as if it were the last physical reminder she would have of him. Sarah, at her side, sensed that they were closer to a resolution, but at the same time, it seemed that with every layer uncovered, the danger grew. The discovery came as a devastating blow. During one of their visits to an old acquaintance of John, a man with a gruff voice and wary eyes, Sarah and Victoria finally found a clue that would change everything. "John got involved with dangerous people," the man said in an almost fearful whisper. "He didn't want to, but it seemed he had no choice." The words echoed like thunder between them, who could barely believe what they were hearing. The father Sarah had known, the calm, loving man, now appeared with a new, darker side. Victoria gripped Sarah's arm, trying to convey some calm amid the revelation. "These people, what did he need to protect us from?" Victoria asked, almost breathless. The man hesitated, casting a wary glance around before continuing. "I don't know much, but I know he was involved with powerful people, people who could destroy anyone who crossed their path." The gravity of his words made Sarah and Victoria exchange alarmed looks. The life they thought they knew seemed to slip through their fingers, replaced by a hidden, dangerous reality. On their way back to the mansion, the silence between them was almost palpable. The weight of the truth was still difficult to bear, especially for Sarah, who had always believed her father left only memories of longing. "He was running for us to keep us safe," she murmured to herself as if trying to absorb the depth of John's sacrifice. Victoria took her hand in a firm gesture. "And he kept us in the dark to protect us," she added, her voice choked with the painful discovery. Every fragment of the story revealed a side of John that Sarah and Victoria had never imagined. In an old newspaper clipping they found days later, there were mentions of a businessman who had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind unfinished projects and dangerous partners. Though John's name was not in the article, the descriptions and clues were undeniable. He had been entangled in something much bigger than himself, something that forced him to give up everything, even his own life and happiness. Victoria tried to imagine the pain John must have felt as he walked away. "He left everything, even the love he felt, to save those he loved," she whispered, a mixture of admiration and sadness. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, imagining how many precious moments he had sacrificed for a life full of secrets. It was as if John had been a ghost of himself, a man who carried the weight of choices no one else understood, all to ensure the safety of those he loved. In a discreet conversation with a retired investigator, Sarah and Victoria learned that John had been pressured by threats. These men, they wouldn't leave him alone. He had to disappear. It was that, or, the sentence trailed off, but the meaning was clear. The investigator explained that John had tried everything to find a less drastic way out, but when he realized the dangers would not lessen, he made the decision to leave forever. Sarah's heart broke as she understood that her father had been forced to disappear to prevent the worst. With each new discovery, John's image became more complex. He wasn't just a man who had vanished without explanation. He was someone who had made an extreme sacrifice, renouncing his own life to ensure that no one else would suffer. For Sarah, this was devastating, as each lost moment now seemed part of an unshared suffering. And Victoria, beside her, kept her gaze low, bearing the pain of the man she had loved and who had left without a goodbye. As they recalled the past, Victoria and Sarah began to realize how much John had built barriers to protect them. The faces and threats he had faced alone were shadows that, in some way, still lingered over them. His sacrifice now made sense, yet left a bitter taste. "There was never another choice for him," Victoria concluded, her voice so low it seemed to disappear. "He would always choose to protect us, no matter the cost." The final revelation felt like an inevitable sentence. John had never returned because he believed that distance was the only way to ensure that his beloved and his daughter would live in peace. The revelations that Sarah and Victoria had unearthed brought not only answers but also unexpected dangers. They realized that by investigating John's past, they were stepping into unknown territory, where powerful people still seemed intent on keeping everything buried. One day, as they left an old agency John used to frequent, they noticed a dark car following them at a discreet distance. Fear took them by surprise, but they exchanged firm looks, deciding they would not be intimidated. The journey had already cost them so much, and turning back now would mean losing everything they had gained. Days later, when they tried to visit an old acquaintance of John's, they found the door to his house locked and the place deserted. Neighbors mentioned that the man had suddenly decided to move without leaving a trace. "It seems like someone is trying to erase the clues," Victoria whispered, her voice filled with a bitter suspicion. Sarah only nodded, feeling the weight of that silent chase but without hesitating. Each obstacle seemed to confirm that the truth they were seeking was far more dangerous than they had imagined. The anonymous calls began soon after. Distorted voices left them cryptic, yet threatening messages, warning them to leave the past alone. Sarah listened to the messages with a mix of anger and determination, refusing to back down. "These threats only prove that we're on the right track," she said, while Victoria nodded with a firm look, though inside she felt a mix of fear and resentment. Together, they were determined to press forward, even as the shadow of danger grew larger. On a cloudy morning, as they researched in an old library, they noticed a suspicious-looking man watching them. He tried to act casual, flipping through a newspaper, but Sarah recognized him from a previous encounter. Whispering to Victoria, she suggested they leave separately, each taking a different route in hopes of losing their pursuer. They left with hearts racing, eyes sharp for anything unusual. This silent pursuit was beginning to turn their journey into a struggle for their own safety. Victoria, although accustomed to dealing with the spotlight of fame, felt that the weight of this investigation was different. "I never thought the past could be so threatening," she confided to Sarah as they reviewed documents one quiet night. For both of them, The risks they were taking only reinforced the importance of moving forward. John had left them a dangerous path, but each new threat seemed to fuel their resolve. Pain and doubt now merged into a fierce courage, driven by the determination to uncover the whole truth. Despite the mounting threats, they didn't give up. One evening, while reviewing a pile of old papers in Sarah's room, the street lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. They held their breath, listening to the sounds of the street. For Sarah, it was a moment of true fear, but also something deeper, the realization of how far they were willing to go. The darkness around them felt like a metaphor for the very path they were treading, but together, they felt a silent strength urging them forward. The tension intensified with each new clue, but so did their bond. In a moment of vulnerability, Victoria admitted, "I never thought anyone could understand what John meant to me, until now." Sarah realized that Victoria was speaking with an almost painful honesty, and suddenly, the resentment she still carried for her father felt small compared to the loyalty he held for both of them. Victoria and Sarah were united not only by blood but by the truth and the sacrifice that John had made out of love. Finally, they followed a lead that took them to a small town in the countryside, where someone mentioned having seen a man who resembled John. As they traveled to the place together, the silence in the car was filled with expectation and fear. They didn't know what they would find, but the possibility of being close to the truth gave them strength. As they crossed into the town, they felt that each mile brought them closer not only to John but to the answers they had sought with so much sacrifice. The tension was at its peak. For Victoria and Sarah, this journey had already become something far greater than a simple investigation. It was a quest for truth and John's legacy, the man who had meant everything to them both and who had sacrificed his own life out of love. The small town, surrounded by mountains and lined with cobblestone streets, had a peaceful air, almost isolated from the world. Sarah and Victoria arrived at the address the last clue pointed to, a village so remote it seemed forgotten by time. At the end of a tree-lined street, there was a modest house with faded curtains and a simple garden. This was the place. Sarah's heart pounded, and she felt Victoria's hand gripping hers, as if they both needed the shared courage for what lay ahead. As they approached the door, they heard slow footsteps on the other side, as if someone had sensed their presence and hesitated to answer. When the door finally opened, John stood there, aged but unmistakable, with the same deep, intense eyes that Sarah remembered. He remained silent for a moment as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing, until a shy, emotional smile spread across his face. "Sarah." "Victoria?" His voice was a whisper of relief and pain, as if time had waited for this very moment. The reunion was silent at first, each of them absorbing the presence of the other, as if afraid that it might all disappear in an instant. Sarah, feeling the weight of accumulated longing, threw herself into his arms, letting the tears she had held back for months finally fall. "Why, Dad? Why did you disappear like that?" she asked, her voice breaking as he stroked her hair, just as he did when she was a child. "I didn't want to, my daughter. Believe me, it was the only way to keep you safe." Victoria, standing at the door, looked at John with a mixture of love and contained sorrow, as if still trying to grasp if this moment was real. "John, you never came back, never sent a letter?" Her voice faltered, carrying an old sadness now mingled with the relief of seeing him alive. 16. John approached her, hesitantly, and took her hand with a tenderness that still held traces of the love they had shared. "I never stopped thinking about you, Victoria," he confessed, his voice breaking. "But I knew that by disappearing I was keeping everything I loved safe." They continued their conversation inside, where John began to tell the story he had never shared with anyone. With a voice that held both exhaustion and relief, he explained how he had become entangled with powerful people who had drawn him into a world of intrigue and danger. "I tried to escape, tried to protect you both, but the only option they gave me was to disappear." With each word, Sarah and Victoria felt the weight of the sacrifice John had made, a choice that condemned him to live on the margins, away from everyone he loved. "Every day away from you was a struggle," John continued, looking down at the floor, his voice heavy with what seemed like regret. "I held on to the hope that one day you would understand, but I knew I might never be able to explain." Sarah held his hands tightly, feeling that she was finally beginning to understand the complex, loving man her father was. His sacrifice had not been an escape but an act of extreme love, and she felt the weight of that love in both his words and his silences. Time seemed to stand still as they shared those revelations, as if the outside world no longer mattered. John spoke of the nights when, even miles away, he thought of Sarah and Victoria, hoping that both were safe. Victoria listened, her eyes wet with tears, realizing that his love remained as strong as ever. "I hope that even from afar, you would feel that I never left," he said, squeezing her hand with tenderness. When the conversation grew quiet, the air felt lighter, as if this reunion had brought with it a peace long denied. Sarah, looking at her father and Victoria, felt that the pieces finally fit, that the painful past now seemed less dark. But there was still a sadness mixed with joy, a recognition that lost time would never be regained. Yet the present offered a chance to rebuild, to live a new life. The last hours of that afternoon were filled with smiles and tears, with words interrupted by meaningful silences, where each respected the pain and relief of the other. John knew that the wounds of the past wouldn't fade away, but as he looked at Sarah and Victoria, he felt that, for the first time in years, he could live in peace, free from the weight of secrets. After reuniting with John and understanding all that he had sacrificed for them, Victoria felt there was still something left to do. The secret they had carried for so long now felt more like a burden than a shield. She knew that as long as John's past remained hidden, something within her would remain unresolved. With a deep sigh, she made the decision to make her story with him public, to face the truth under the spotlight she had so often used to mask her pain. News of Victoria Carter giving an exclusive interview spread quickly. The media was used to hearing about the famous actress's successes and projects, but this time, there was something deeper, more personal. When reporters entered the hall where the interview would take place, they noticed a difference in Victoria's expression. She looked calm, but there was a hint of melancholy in her gaze as well as a sense of resolve. Beside her, John and Sarah waited with a solemn expression, making it clear that this moment was more than just a regular press conference. Victoria began by recounting how she met John, how he had been an essential part of her life, and how their love had been one of the most powerful forces in her youth. Her words were delicate but charged with emotion. For the public, this revelation was shocking, as if, behind the untouchable star, there was a real woman with a story of loss and sacrifice. She described the happy moments they shared and how that love was abruptly interrupted by John's disappearance, a silence that had haunted her for so many years. Then Victoria revealed the truth about the sacrifice John had made to protect her. She explained that his disappearance was not out of choice or lack of love but out of the need to keep her and Sarah safe. "He vanished so that we could live in peace," she said, her voice choked, her eyes welling up with tears that reflected a mix of pain and liberation. The audience was silent, captivated by the sincerity in her words, feeling as though they were witnessing the most intimate side of Victoria for the first time. John, sitting beside her, remained quiet for most of the interview, but as he heard Victoria's words, he took her hand and looked at the reporters with a steady gaze. "I lost many years, but I would do it all over again if it meant Victoria and Sarah were safe." His voice, though low, carried a strength no one there had expected. For him, the public revelation was not merely an explanation but a final act of closure. He was, at last, freeing himself from the shadows that had kept him isolated. The interview was not easy for Sarah, who watched her parents speak of a love that, until that moment, had been unknown to her. She felt touched and grateful to see how much her father had loved her, so much that he had distanced himself from everything to protect her. This story wasn't just about the two of them, it was about her too. In that moment, she felt that all the pieces of her life were beginning to fall into place. Looking at the journalists, she realized that her family's truth was not a weakness but a strength they could now share with the world. Finally, Victoria paused, gazing at the audience with tear-filled eyes, and closed with a phrase that touched everyone. "True love requires sacrifices that we don't always understand, but in the end, it shapes who we really are." The depth of her words resonated among everyone present. It was the end of a chapter, not only for them but also for those who had followed Victoria's story for so many years. The woman behind the screen had revealed herself in all her vulnerability. When the interview ended, the three of them left the hall in silence, but there was a lightness in the air. Victoria, John, and Sarah knew that they had, at last, closed a painful part of their lives. While the press still discussed what they had heard, they walked together, leaving behind the weight of secrets that had been kept far too long. After the public revelation and the burden of secrets exposed to light, Sarah, John, and Victoria could finally focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding their bonds and rediscovering themselves as a family. Every day they spent together seemed to heal an old wound, as though the lost time was slowly being filled. Amid conversations about the past, nostalgic smiles, and dreams for the future, they began to chart a new story, one no longer marked by suffering and sacrifice but by the promise of peace and unity. Victoria, who had long been accustomed to facing the world alone, now found a different strength beside John and Sarah. Their presence was a constant reminder that the pain she had carried for so many years now had a reason to be left behind. On a quiet afternoon, watching the blooming garden of her mansion alongside Sarah, Victoria remarked with an emotional smile, "I never thought that after everything I could feel so much peace." Sarah held her mother's hand, sensing that a new kind of family was forming. For John, each moment with them was a gift. The simple life he had led in his hideaway now felt meaningless compared to the warmth of the family he could now reclaim. The smiles of Sarah and Victoria were his greatest reward, and he knew that at last his struggle had come to an end. During a homemade dinner he had prepared, he raised a glass of wine with an emotional look and said, his voice thick with emotion, "There's nothing in the world I would trade for this moment." The toast was shared with tears of happiness and the sparkle of a future that, for the first time, felt truly safe. The days, once lonely and filled with questions, now passed with lightness. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude, a strength of belonging she had never experienced before. One late afternoon, as she walked with her father through a nearby grove, she confessed, "You know, Dad, for years I imagined what it would be like to have you here, and with each passing day, I realized it was worth the wait." John hugged her, feeling that every sacrifice he had made was worth it in that moment. The love they shared, now free of barriers, was the most precious thing he could have regained. Victoria, who had once kept her emotions carefully guarded, now allowed herself to laugh and play alongside John and Sarah. The three of them created new memories, light and sweet, far from the drama that had once surrounded them. On a sunny morning, as they sorted through a box of old photos, Victoria picked up a picture of herself and John in their youth, smiling together, and showed it to Sarah. "This is how it all started, and now we can continue," she said, her eyes shining. The past was where it needed to be, and the future finally seemed possible. Victoria's mansion, once silent and imposing, now echoed with the laughter and conversations of this rebuilt family. They made plans for trips, simple gatherings with friends and relatives, and even charitable projects they could work on together. Sarah, who now knew the full complexity of her history, felt whole for the first time. As she walked through the garden, where she had so often thought about the uncertainties of the past, she knew her present was solid and full. Over time, the trio opened their home to those closest to them, shedding the distant image Victoria's fame had once demanded. She could finally be herself, with all the vulnerabilities and loves she had always kept hidden. The woman on the movie screen was now replaced by someone more real, who embraced her past and celebrated her present alongside John and Sarah. And so, the relationships once fragmented by absence were now rooted in the strength of having survived it all. One sunny afternoon, gathered on the porch, the three of them watched the sunset in silence, letting unnecessary words be replaced by the peace they felt. There were no more secrets, no more regrets or fears. The love that had united them in the past and endured through shadows now manifested as something invincible, a feeling that had withstood every trial. And as the sky turned shades of orange and gold, John whispered, "We're finally where we were always meant to be." The past was left where it belonged, as a distant, complete memory. They had faced and overcome what life had thrown at them, and now, in that moment of absolute peace, they were ready to start anew together. If you enjoyed the incredible story of Sarah, Victoria, and John, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming videos. If you love emotional tales and want to support our channel in bringing more quality content, consider contributing via Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your support is essential for our continued improvement. Thank you for your support. Until the next emotional tale.